It all started 3 years ago when I met the most enchanting woman at a coffee shop near my office. Emily. The name alone was as sweet as the honey drizzle she always ordered in her lattes. She was 2 years older than me, but her bright smile and lively laughter made me forget the gap. From the beginning, Emily had this glow that could light up any room, and I was smitten. She worked as a flight attendant, a job that fit her free-spirited nature perfectly, but it also sowed the seeds of my insecurities. We began dating shortly after, and things were magical at first. But you know how it goes, when your girlfriend is up in the air, your thoughts go to dark places. I found myself constantly wondering, what if she meets someone? I trusted her, but there were days when that trust felt like a rope fraying under pressure. She'd often reassure me, laughing off my jealousy, calling me her silly, overthinking puppy. It was cute, until it wasn't. Her work demanded long hours and weeks away. Each time she packed her suitcase, I'd stare at her meticulously folded uniforms and feel like I was packing away pieces of myself. I tried to play it cool, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. But paranoia has a funny way of sneaking into the cracks of your mind, doesn't it? When Emily and I started dating, it felt like we had cracked some secret code to happiness. We were one of those annoyingly cute couples, always holding hands, finishing each other's sentences, and making strangers gag with our public displays of affection. Emily had this way of making every moment feel like it was straight out of a rom-com. She was adventurous, with a curiosity about the world that was nothing short of contagious. Her job as a flight attendant gave her access to an endless stream of stories, and I loved hearing them all. She'd come home from her trips with gifts from faraway places, a tiny Eiffel Tower keychain, exotic teas from Japan, a pair of wooden clogs from Amsterdam. "For you," she'd say with a cheeky smile, "so you can walk in my shoes for a change." We had a ritual whenever she came back from a trip. I'd pick her up from the airport with her favorite snacks in hand, usually some combination of chocolate and salty pretzels, and she'd jump into my arms as though we'd been apart for months instead of days. Then we'd head home, order a ridiculous amount of takeout, and binge-watch travel shows while Emily critiqued the destinations. "Oh, no, Rick Steves totally missed the best street food stall in Bangkok," she'd scoff, tossing popcorn at the screen. Even her quirks were adorable. She had this thing about organizing the dishwasher in a very particular way, cups on the left, plates on the right, and woe betide anyone who disrupted her system. I once rearranged it as a joke, and she dramatically gasped, "You've violated the Geneva Convention of Dishwashing." Emily also had a soft spot for surprises. Once, when she was on a layover in Miami, she had an artist sketch a caricature of us from a photo on her phone. It was hilarious and utterly unflattering. Her head was drawn twice the size of mine, but it became a centerpiece on our wall. We built a bubble of joy and silliness, where life felt lighter and freer. Even my friends noticed the change in me. "You're glowing," my buddy Mike teased one day. "Are you in love, or did you find a new skincare routine?" "I'm with Emily," I said, grinning like a fool. And that was all the explanation I needed. At that point, we were that couple everyone envied, the kind that made love look effortless. I was so lost in her world, so wrapped up in the whirlwind of her charm, that I didn't notice the subtle storm clouds gathering on the horizon. But for now, life was beautiful. Perfect, even. Our relationship wasn't just about the grand gestures or the whirlwind romance, it was in the small, quiet moments where we found our rhythm. Emily had a knack for making me step outside of my comfort zone. She was the type who'd convince you to do karaoke even though you couldn't carry a tune, and then cheer you on like you were the next Ed Sheeran. "Life is too short for regrets," she'd say, pulling me up onto the makeshift stage at some dive bar. And there I'd be, off-key and blushing, while Emily clapped along, yelling, "Encore." I, on the other hand, brought a bit of calm to her otherwise chaotic world. I introduced her to the art of lazy Sundays, pajamas all day, no obligations, and pancakes for dinner. At first, she resisted. "How can you just sit there?" she asked, horrified, as I scrolled through Netflix. "It's called relaxing, Emily," I teased, tossing a pillow at her. But soon enough, she was curled up next to me, face buried in a blanket, pretending not to cry during up. Our lives fit together like mismatched puzzle pieces that somehow made sense. She was the extrovert to my introvert, the dreamer to my realist. We joked that if we ever got stranded on a desert island, she'd charm the local wildlife while I built the shelter. The compromises came naturally. I didn't mind staying up late to hear her stories from work, even when I had to be up early. She didn't complain about my obsession with keeping our apartment tidy, even when I labeled the spice rack. "Who alphabetizes nutmeg and paprika?" she teased. "Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference." Her family loved me, well, mostly. Her mom once told me I had kind eyes, which felt like the highest compliment from someone who rarely dished them out. Her dad, though? Not so much. He was the kind of man who saw his daughter's boyfriends as intruders rather than allies. "You're the kid who's afraid of heights, right?" he once grumbled. "How are you going to protect her on a plane?" Emily smoothed things over with a laugh and a wave of her hand, as she always did. "Don't worry, Dad. If Rick falls, I'll catch him." It wasn't perfect, but it was us. A mix of laughter, late-night talks, and a growing pile of memories. Our bubble remained intact, even as the world outside threatened to poke holes in it. And yet, in the quietest corners of my mind, a tiny whisper of doubt began to form. But who listens to whispers when everything feels so right? For every dreamy sunset, there was a storm cloud lurking behind. It started innocuously enough, a few harmless quirks that grew sharper with time, like sandpaper against the skin. Emily's job was demanding, and while I admired her ambition, the constant separations started to chip away at me. She'd be gone for days, sometimes weeks, living a life that seemed untouchable, glamorous, and just out of reach. Whenever she'd return, she had this spark, this energy from the world she'd been immersed in. And there I was, stuck at home, waiting, my world feeling smaller in comparison. I'd joke about it at first. "Do I need to start dressing like an international businessman to get your attention?" I teased one night as she unpacked a set of wine glasses she'd picked up in Paris. She laughed, brushing it off. "Oh, Rick. You're my home. My constant." But the way she said it, almost as if she was trying to convince herself, made my stomach twist. Over time, my jokes turned into jabs. I hated how jealous I was, but I couldn't help it. There were too many stories about flirty pilots, charming passengers, and all those team dinners she attended on her layovers. "Why don't you ever post pictures from these dinners?" I asked once, trying to sound casual. She raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed. "What is this, an interrogation?" "It's just work, Rick. Not everything needs to be on Instagram." I backed off, but the seeds of doubt were firmly planted. Every missed text, every delayed call, every vague explanation started to gnaw at me. And the thing about jealousy? It feeds on itself. The swings in our relationship grew wider. One moment we were laughing about her wild stories, like the time a passenger tried to smuggle a pet iguana onto a flight. The next, I'd be seething silently when she'd get a late-night text that she'd quickly dismiss with, "Oh, just a coworker." "Rick," she said one evening, her voice a mix of exhaustion and exasperation. "You have to trust me. This isn't sustainable if you're going to keep questioning me like this." "I do trust you," I lied. "It's just, I don't know. You're out there living this exciting life, and I'm here. What if you realize I'm not enough?" She sighed and reached for my hand, her grip firm but her gaze distant. "You are enough. I just need you to believe that." But did she believe it? Did I? Then there was the time she cancelled our weekend plans to help a work friend move. He's going through a tough time, she explained, packing up her car with energy drinks and a toolkit I didn't even know she owned. He? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Yes, he. Don't do this, she said, slamming the trunk shut. You're better than this, Rick. But was I? I didn't think so anymore. We started arguing more. About her schedule, her friends, her habit of going radio silent during trips. She'd call me controlling, I'd call her evasive. And the worst part? I hated myself for becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone who snooped through her phone when she was in the shower, searching for proof of something I wasn't even sure existed. The cracks were there, and we both saw them. But instead of addressing them, we filled them with distractions, weekend getaways, new hobbies, expensive dinners that we couldn't really afford. The bubble we had built was starting to feel suffocating. And though neither of us said it out loud, we both knew it was only a matter of time before it burst. The turning point came one rainy Tuesday evening, though at the time, it felt like just another petty argument. Emily had just returned from a 2-week trip to Europe, her face glowing with that post-adventure energy that both enchanted and infuriated me. She was telling me about her time in Milan, the quaint cafes, the stunning architecture, and her crew buddy Brian, who apparently knew every hidden gem in the city. Brian, huh? I said, trying to keep my voice neutral as I stirred a pot of pasta. She paused, sensing the tension. Yes, Brian. He's just a friend, Rick. Do you really want to do this again? I'm not doing anything, I said, too quickly. It's just. I didn't know you were so close to your coworkers. Emily's jaw tightened. It's called being social. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. You should try it sometime. Her words stung, but I let them slide. For the rest of the night, I pretended everything was fine. We watched a movie, shared a bottle of wine, and she fell asleep on the couch with her head on my shoulder. But I couldn't sleep. The name Brian circled in my mind like a vulture. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I had no proof, but my imagination painted vivid pictures of her laughing at his jokes, her hand brushing his arm, her smile reserved for someone else. The next day, when she left her phone on the kitchen counter to take a shower, I caved. My hands shook as I unlocked it. She'd never changed her passcode, a sign of trust one was about to betray. Most of her messages were innocent, but then I saw a thread with B. My heart sank. The texts weren't explicitly incriminating, but they were too familiar for my liking. Last night was so much fun. Can't believe we closed out that bar, one read. Another, you were right about that espresso place. Best I've ever had. I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of relief and dread. Nothing screamed affair, but the casual intimacy was enough to make my chest tighten. I put her phone back just as I heard the shower turn off, my heart pounding like I'd just committed a crime. I told myself I wouldn't bring it up, that I'd let it go. But I couldn't. That evening, I asked, "How's Brian?" trying to sound offhand. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Fine. Why? Just curious, I said, forcing a smile. Her response was calm but clipped. Rick, you need to stop this. He's a friend, nothing more. I don't know what else to tell you. But I wasn't convinced. The problem with jealousy is that it feeds on ambiguity, and the more I tried to suppress it, the more it consumed me. Soon, I found myself tracking her flights online, looking up her coworkers on social media, even timing how long it took her to reply to texts when she was away. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. Our relationship began to revolve around my obsession with her loyalty. Emily noticed, of course, and it drove a wedge between us. "Do you even like me anymore?" she asked one night after another argument. "I love you," I said, "but even to my ears, it sounded like an excuse rather than a declaration. She looked at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then trust me. Because I can't keep doing this. But I didn't trust her. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if the problem was her or me. By the time winter rolled around, the tension in our relationship was palpable, like a coiled spring ready to snap. Emily's trips became longer, her stories shorter, and her laughter, once so vibrant, started to feel distant, like it wasn't meant for me anymore. I tried to chalk it up to her work. The holidays were always busier for her, and she'd often return home utterly exhausted. But even when she was home, it felt like she wasn't really here. "I'm just tired," she'd say when I asked why she was so quiet, brushing off my concerns with a quick kiss and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The late-night texts became more frequent. She'd sit on the couch, phone in hand, her fingers flying across the screen as she giggled softly. "Who's that?" I asked one evening, trying to keep my tone light. "Just Lisa," she said, naming one of her flight attendant friends. "She's freaking out about her Christmas plans." But when I casually mentioned Lisa the next day, Emily couldn't even remember what her freakout had been about. The lie was so small, so insignificant, that it felt worse than something big. I started to notice more inconsistencies. Her explanations for missed calls didn't add up. Her stories about her trips became vaguer, with fewer details than she used to share. And then there was the dress. One evening, as we were getting ready to go out for dinner, I saw it, a sleek black cocktail dress hanging in her closet. "When did you get this?" I asked, admiring its elegant cut. "Oh, that old thing? I've had it for ages," she said, her back turned to me as she brushed her hair. But I knew her wardrobe as well as my own. That dress wasn't old, and she'd certainly never worn it around me. The doubts that had been gnawing at me for months now screamed for attention. I didn't want to believe it, I wanted so badly to trust her, but the pieces were falling into place, and the picture they painted wasn't good. Then came the night that sealed my suspicions. Emily had gone out with her crew to celebrate someone's promotion, and I decided to let her have her space. But when I texted her around midnight to check in, the reply didn't come until 2 hours later. "Sorry, fell asleep at Lisa's after too much wine. Be home in the morning." Lisa again. The convenient friend who seemed to be a catch-all explanation for any of Emily's late nights. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stared at my phone, scrolling through her social media, rereading old texts, searching for clues. And then I saw it, a tagged photo on a coworker's Instagram story. The caption read, "Best team ever." Emily was in the photo, her arm draped casually around a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, her face tilted toward his, and something about the way they stood, close, too close, made my stomach twist. When she came home the next morning, I didn't say anything. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I was terrified of what she might say. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. Instead, I waited. I told myself I needed more proof, something undeniable. That's how I found myself agreeing to go mushroom picking with my friends the following weekend, desperate for a distraction. But life has a cruel sense of timing, and instead of finding peace in the woods, I found something that would change everything. That fateful weekend, the air was crisp, the leaves damp with morning dew. My friends and I had decided to go mushroom picking, one of those quaint, old-fashioned activities that usually did wonders for my overactive mind. I thought the quiet of the forest might help me reset, give me a moment to breathe. But fate had other plans. We'd split up to cover more ground. I wandered deeper into the woods, basket in hand, my boots crunching against the underbrush. For a moment, the serene beauty of the forest pulled me out of my head. The trees stretched endlessly, the sunlight filtering through in golden beams. Then I heard it. A soft laugh, feminine and all too familiar. I froze. My heart thundered in my chest as I crept toward the sound. What were the chances? No, I told myself. It's not her. It can't be. But as I rounded a dense cluster of trees, the scene before me shattered my world. There she was, Emily, her unmistakable figure leaning against a tree. And standing far too close to her, his hand trailing down her arm, was a man I recognized immediately, Michael, the mayor's son. Michael was everything I wasn't, tall, with a chiseled jaw and the kind of smirk that reeked of entitlement. His expensive leather jacket and polished boots were out of place in the earthy woods, but Emily didn't seem to care. She was laughing, her head tilted back in that way she did when she was completely at ease. For a moment, I thought I might wake up. This couldn't be real. But then Michael leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, and the betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. "Emily," I called out, my voice louder than I intended. They broke apart, both of them startled. Emily's face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. Michael, on the other hand, smirked, his confidence unshaken. "Well, this is awkward," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. I didn't even know what to say. My fists clenched at my sides as I turned to Emily. "What the hell is this?" "Rick, I can explain," she stammered, stepping forward. But I didn't want to hear it. I was done with explanations, with half-truths and excuses. My anger turned to Michael. "You think this is funny?" I growled, stepping toward him. Michael's smirk grew wider. "Hey, man, maybe you should have kept a tighter leash on her." The next thing I knew, my fist connected with his jaw. The impact reverberated through my arm, and Michael stumbled back, clutching his face. "Rick! Stop!" Emily screamed, rushing between us. Michael straightened, a trickle of blood on his lip, and glared at me. "You'll regret that," he hissed, but I didn't care. "Don't talk to me about regret," I snapped. Emily grabbed my arm, her grip firm. "Rick, please, let's go. This isn't what it looks like." I turned to her, my voice trembling. "Then what is it, Emily? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I've been afraid of." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I shook my head, pulling away from her. "I'm done," I said, my voice cold. "Do whatever you want with him. I'm done." I walked away, leaving them behind. But as I stormed back toward the car, something gnawed at me. Emily's reaction. It wasn't just guilt or shame. It was fear. That's when I saw him, another man, standing further down the trail, partially obscured by the trees. His back was to me, but there was no mistaking the way he watched Emily and Michael, his posture tense, his fists clenched. I froze, the pieces of the puzzle starting to shift in my mind. Who was he? Why was he there? And then it hit me. This wasn't just one betrayal. This was something much more tangled, much more deceitful. Emily hadn't just lied to me, she'd lied to both of them. I turned back toward the trail, my anger now mixed with confusion. What had she gotten herself into? And how had I been blind to it for so long? The drive home was a blur. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my mind reeling from what I had seen. Emily with Michael was bad enough, but the shadowy figure lurking in the woods added a new, sinister dimension to everything. I tried to calm myself, to make sense of it, but nothing fit. My gut told me to confront Emily again, to demand the truth, but the sting of her betrayal held me back. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. Hours later, she came home. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cold cup of coffee. Emily hesitated in the doorway, her usual confident stride replaced by cautious, almost timid steps. "Rick," she started, her voice soft. I looked up, my gaze like ice. "Save it, Emily. I don't want more lies. Her lips quivered, but she didn't look away. I wasn't lying to you. Not completely. I laughed bitterly. Oh, well, that's comforting. Go on, Emily. Tell me what part of making out with Michael in the woods wasn't a lie. Her face flushed with guilt, and she sank into the chair across from me. It's not what you think, she said, her voice trembling. Don't insult me, I snapped. I saw you. And I saw the other guy, too. Care to explain that? She froze, her eyes widening. You saw him, she whispered. Yeah, I saw him, I said, leaning forward. Who is he, Emily? Another one of your friends? She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she said, her voice muffled. Mean for what to happen? I demanded. Emily looked up, her eyes filled with tears. His name is Ethan. He's someone I met a few months ago. It started as nothing, just a few conversations during a layover. I didn't think it would go anywhere. And Michael? I asked, my voice a deadly calm. She winced. He came later. He's been helping me with something, and I don't know. Things got complicated. Complicated? I spat. That's what you call juggling two men behind my back. Emily reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she said. I was trying to figure things out, what I wanted, who I wanted, and I got in over my head. And in the meantime, you decided to lie to everyone? I said, my voice rising. I was scared, she said, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know how to tell you. Or them. And now everything's falling apart. I stood, unable to sit still any longer. Falling apart? Emily, you destroyed everything. Do you even realize that? She sobbed, burying her face in her hands again. I know, she whispered. I know I messed up. I paced the room, the weight of her words pressing down on me. So, what now? I asked finally. Are you going to run to Michael? Or Ethan? Or will you just string them along too? She shook her head. I don't know, she said, her voice barely audible. I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, now a stranger sitting across from me. You need to figure it out, I said, my voice cold. Because I'm done being part of this. I left the room, slamming the door behind me, but her sobs echoed in my ears. The betrayal was unbearable, but the truth beneath it was even worse. Emily hadn't just lied to me. She had lied to herself. And now, all of us were paying the price. The next few days passed in a haze of anger, disbelief, and unanswered questions. I hadn't spoken to Emily since our confrontation, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The woman I thought I knew had unraveled before my eyes, and the tangled web of lies she had spun still haunted me. But then, fate threw me a curveball. I was at the local coffee shop, drowning my thoughts in a double espresso, when I felt a presence looming over me. I looked up to see Michael, the mayor's son, his jaw still slightly bruised from our altercation in the woods. What do you want? I asked sharply, not in the mood for another confrontation. He slid into the chair across from me, his expression unreadable. Relax, I'm not here to fight, he said, though his tone was far from friendly. I think we need to talk. I frowned. About what? About Emily, he said, his voice low but firm. And about the other guy. My heart skipped a beat. What do you know about him? Michael leaned back, crossing his arms. Enough to know she's been playing both of us. I saw him too, after you left. He came out of the woods like he was looking for her. At first, I thought he was just some random guy, but then I realized, he's been in the picture longer than I have. I clenched my fists, the anger bubbling up again. So what? Are you here to gloat? To compare notes on how she lied to us? Michael shook his head. No, I'm here because I think we deserve better. And because I'm tired of being someone's second choice, or third, apparently. I stared at him, trying to read his intentions. What are you proposing? Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I want to confront her. Together. And I want Ethan there too. She can't keep getting away with this. For a moment, I considered telling him to go to hell. But then I thought about everything Emily had done, the lies, the manipulation, the sheer audacity of it all. She had toyed with all of us, and maybe it was time for her to face the consequences. Fine, I said, my voice hard. But if this blows up, it's on you. Michael smirked, but there was no humor in it. Oh, it'll blow up. That's the point. Later that evening, Michael and I managed to track down Ethan. It wasn't hard, Michael apparently had his own sources, a perk of being the mayor's son. Ethan was hesitant at first, defensive even, but once we laid out the truth, his face darkened. So, she's been lying to all of us? He asked, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and betrayal. Welcome to the club, I said bitterly. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right. Let's do it. Let's make her explain herself. The three of us agreed to meet Emily at her favorite cafe, a neutral ground where she wouldn't see us coming. She arrived late, as usual, her face lighting up when she saw me, until she spotted Michael and Ethan sitting beside me. Her smile faltered, and she froze in the doorway. What's going on? She asked, her voice shaky. Take a seat, Michael said coldly. Emily hesitated, her eyes darting between us, but she finally slid into the chair across from us. So, I began, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Care to explain how you managed to juggle 3 guys at once? Or were there more we don't know about? Emily's face turned pale. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. Ethan laughed bitterly. Don't play dumb, Emily. We know everything. The lies, the sneaking around, the games. It's over. Michael leaned in, his jaw tight. You used all of us. For what? Attention? Thrills? Do you even care about anyone but yourself? Emily's eyes filled with tears, but none of us were moved. I never meant to hurt anyone, she said weakly. Save it, I snapped. You don't get to cry and play the victim now. Her facade cracked, and she buried her face in her hands. But this time, there was no one to comfort her. Consider this your wake-up call, Michael said as he stood, tossing a 20 on the table for the coffee. You don't get to treat people like pawns. We're done with you. Ethan and I followed suit, leaving Emily alone at the table, her sobs echoing behind us. As we walked away, Michael turned to me. Feel better? Not yet, I said. But it's a start. For the first time in months, I felt a weight lift from my chest. It wasn't closure, not completely, but it was enough to move forward. The days that followed were oddly quiet. For the first time in months, my mind wasn't consumed with doubts, suspicions, or trying to piece together Emily's lies. The confrontation had been cathartic in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't over it, not entirely, but I'd taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. Michael, Ethan, and I didn't stay in touch after that day. There wasn't much to say. We had united against a shared betrayal, but we weren't friends. We were just 3 men who happened to be caught in the same storm. Emily tried reaching out a few times, of course. Calls, texts, emails, all filled with apologies, explanations, and pleas for a second chance. I was lost, one message read. I didn't know how to handle my feelings. "Please, Rick, we can fix this." But I didn't respond. There was nothing left to fix. One evening, I found myself walking through the same forest where everything had come crashing down. The air was crisp, the earthy scent of the woods grounding me in the present. As I wandered, I thought about everything that had happened, how blind I had been, how far I had let things spiral out of control. But for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt relief. Losing Emily wasn't the end of my world. If anything, it was the beginning of something new. A chance to rebuild, to find someone who wouldn't make me doubt myself, someone who could love me without lies. When I reached the clearing where I had found Emily and Michael, I stood still, letting the memory wash over me. It was strange, standing there now, the moment felt smaller, less significant. Just a fragment of my past, not the defining moment of my life. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. I smiled to myself, a small but genuine smile. "Goodbye, Emily," I whispered, though no one was there to hear it. Months later, I was sitting in a different coffee shop, flipping through a book, when a voice interrupted me. "Excuse me," it said, soft and warm. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up to see a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She held a cup of tea in one hand and a notebook in the other, her presence calm and inviting. "No, go ahead," I said, motioning to the chair. As she sat down, we struck up a conversation, simple, light, unburdened by the shadows of the past. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, hope. Emily was my lesson, not my ending. And as I walked out of that cafe later, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure, I was finally ready for it. 2 years passed. Life had moved on in ways I never thought possible. I had a new job, a few new hobbies, and even started dating someone, Sarah, a graphic designer with a laugh that could light up any room. My world felt steady, peaceful, and far removed from the chaos Emily had brought into my life. But the past has a funny way of resurfacing. One evening, I was at a bar with my friends when an old acquaintance from our town approached me. Jason was one of those guys who always knew everyone's business, and his face lit up when he saw me. "Rick. Man, it's been ages," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Yeah, it has," I said, smiling politely. We exchanged small talk for a bit, but then he leaned in, his tone dropping conspiratorially. "Hey, did you hear about Emily?" The mention of her name was like a cold gust of wind. I hadn't thought about her in ages, not in any real way. "No," I said cautiously. "What about her?" Jason sighed, shaking his head. "Man, it's bad. Real bad. She's homeless. I heard she's been admitted to the psychiatric hospital a few times, something about a breakdown and drug use." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Homeless?" I echoed, struggling to process what he was saying. "Yeah," Jason said, taking a swig of his beer. "Apparently, things spiraled after, well, you know. She started hanging with the wrong crowd, got into some heavy stuff. I heard the mayor's son had something to do with it at first, he got her into the party scene. But then she just fell off the map." I sat there, stunned. The image of Emily that Jason painted was unrecognizable. The vibrant, adventurous woman I had loved, the one who had once filled my life with laughter and chaos, reduced to this? "Last I heard," Jason continued, "she's in a rehab facility. Some kind of court-mandated thing. Don't know if it'll help, though. She's pretty far gone." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to feel anger or even satisfaction. She had lied to me, betrayed me, destroyed what we had. But all I felt was sadness. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the memories of our time together. The good, the bad, and everything in between. Emily had made her choices, but it seemed life had punished her far more than I ever could have imagined. In the end, I decided not to reach out. Whatever path Emily was on, it wasn't one I could, or should, be part of. But I hoped, deep down, that she could find her way back to herself, to the bright, spirited woman she had once been. Life is unpredictable, messy, and sometimes cruel. But it moves forward, and so did I. For the first time in years, I felt grateful, not just for the life I had now, but for the lessons Emily had taught me, even if they came at a high cost. And as I drifted off to sleep, I silently wished her peace, wherever she was. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference.